Ukraine, Sudan, Gaza. Why would we not think that the impunity in Ukraine wouldn't drive the impunity in Sudan, wouldn't drive the impunity in Gaza? And the idea now that all of these journalists killed in Gaza by Israel means that me as a journalist, when I go somewhere like Kampala, which is meant to be safe, could be killed by a soldier when they're trying to suppress protests because he knows that Israel got away with it and they can too. I'd see these women on the bank of the river that splits the border and they're just looking at their village burn and they're just staring silently. And I'm just like, oh, they've been through this several times before. The UAE gave Hemeti global impunity because the West was never going to call out the RSF at the level that was needed and put a stop to the war with the UAE's involvement.
You actually get the chance to go back to your family home in Khartoum and to see it for the first time in 2 years or more after it was ransacked.
Yeah.
And that was a very striking thing to watch.
Yeah.
Is that on? The night before my next guest came on Real Talk, she had won an award in the UK for her reporting. Yousra Elbagir is the Africa correspondent for Sky News UK, and she's someone who's been heavily praised for her reporting on a war that's been largely absent from mainstream news coverage, Sudan. Now, as the fighting in the country enters its fourth year, Sudan has become the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Millions have been displaced as cities are destroyed by a brutal power struggle and foreign interference. But for Yousra, this isn't just work or a news story. Sudan is also her home. A highlight for me is when she returned to the capital, Khartoum, going straight to her family house of 25 years, reporting on her childhood home that got ransacked by the Rapid Support Forces. So when she joined me on Real Talk, we spoke about her reporting on Sudan, the siege of cities like el-Fasher, the foreign powers backing the warring parties, and the emotional toll of telling these stories. My name is Mohamed Hashem, and this is Real Talk.
Yousra Elbagir, welcome to Real Talk. It's
Thank
such a
you.
pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
No, me too. There's a lot we're going to talk about, but you know, fresh on the start, congrats on your award.
Thank you.
What is it? You won Journalist of the Year or TV Journalist of the Year?
Yeah, Network Television Journalist of the Year.
Okay.
From the Royal Television Society. And what's cool is it's the oldest television society in the world. And David Attenborough used to be the president, which is a big deal for me.
Boom, iconic.
Yeah, but what was so cool is it just felt like as a team, we were all so happy, like channel-wide, everyone's so happy. Because I think everyone's contributed and seen how hard it's been and I mean, seriously hard yards, but every little touch, every contribution, taglines, you know, digicuts, just to bring it forward and to make it as polished and as impactful as possible in terms of, you know, it's not just reporting on the ground. So just to feel like everyone felt validated and affirmed that the choice we made to continue to cover Sudan consistently, constantly, diligently, was recognized, was huge.
Yeah.
Really huge.
No, and congratulations. But I guess the first question that comes to mind is since winning this award, how have you been thinking of your career thus far? Because I used to, for example, watch you a lot when you were covering the revolution. And I think a lot of people became a lot more familiar with your work during that time. But how have you been looking back?
Wow. I mean, it's interesting because when I'm looking, I'm kind of still looking ahead. It's almost like I'm just like, okay, this is a tool to keep doing what we're doing and to be empowered and emboldened to do more. But looking back, I mean, at the ceremony, Channel 4 News was there, who I covered the revolution with, and they all stood up and they all came around. And it was really, there was just a real sense of, this isn't just a year, like this is the last 10 years. And this is everyone who contributed over the last 10 years. And seeing my colleagues from Vice News there as well. It was surreal. Like it really felt like I was in some sort of highlight reel of my career over the last decade. And just to be able to share that with them. But similar to what we're covering now, these things don't happen overnight, right?
Course,
so it's just like the war was usurped and then there was the revolution. In terms of covering the revolution, I learned how to do my job in a certain way. And those tools equipped me to cover the war. And in the same way that the revolution taught us as a community how to band together, how to take care of one another, those resistance committees that, birthed the emergency response rooms in the war. It was like we were preparing for an inevitable war, but we were trying to also divert the war off to prevent the war through the revolution. So it's just this, it's just interlinked. I will never be able to kind of remove my career from my personal life and ambitions. It's all merged. And there was a point very early on in the war when I ran into my uncle that I kind of accepted at that point that Uncle Mohsen, I accepted that I can't detach the two. And the choice to then share that moment, I mean, it was live on air, but then to have that clipped up and shared. And that clip helped us get into Sudan because the Saudi authorities, one of the border official was like, I saw your video, and pushed back on the authorities and let us through.
And let me actually give the context for this, because this is actually quite an important moment. So you were basically where? You were in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And there was a ferry coming through with people who were escaping the war from Sudan.
Yeah.
And you were just filming and you were talking to people, Sudanese people that were escaping.
A Peruvian family. How crazy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Like there were so many expats in Khartoum.
Sure. Okay.
And it was nuts to see them all coming out.
And then as you're kind of just interviewing people, you spot your uncle.
That's my uncle. المحسن الحمد لله على السلامة. ما عرفك انت جيت. It was honestly, Mohammed, it was so weird because I just felt eyes on me and I was just like, and then I just turned and everything dropped.
Yeah.
And I ran.
Yeah.
And Garwin, my cameraman at the time, he's so smooth. He just ran with me. Like I didn't even feel him there. And I just ran and hugged him because I had no idea that he had even gotten to Port Sudan. I thought he was still in Khartoum.
And it was such a human, like, family moment.
It was like we were so relieved. And there was so much love. And it was just like holding him and embracing him. And I mean, later on, when I it was like, oh, this is real. Like there was the love and everyone felt, I could feel everyone on the deck. I could feel the awe and like the warmth around us. And then back to reality. Oh, this is real. That's him in flesh and blood. My parents are still in Khartoum, still in Khartoum. And so that kind of put the fire in me to get the visas and try and get on a boat. No flights. And everyone's leaving. And we're fixated on getting in and covering the war and getting my parents out.
And this is when someone, I guess from what was it? It wasn't border control, but it was like some sort of immigration officer that said, I've seen your video.
Yeah. So there was just a bit of trickiness about us getting on this ferry. And the border official came on and he said, what's happening? What's the deal? And I said, XYZ. We're not sure if we can go. He said, what do you want to do? And I said, I need to get in and get my family out. And he goes, I know. I saw the video. Put your bags back on. And I was just like, put the bags back on. Like, I just was like, what? And the impact that video had, I think made it very clear to me in those are the first 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Of a 3-year, like now going into 3-year war, that the sharing is important and that, it's not going to be constant. I actually withhold a lot of the personal impact, but that there are going to be pivotal moments that I'm going to have to share, just like I expect the people that I interview to share their most vulnerable moments in the hardest times of their lives. And so when we couldn't access my home that trip, and the trip after, like it was like 5 trips over 2 years. It wasn't until
2025, right? Till last year.
No, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it was 5 trips over 2 years to Khartoum, let alone the trips we did on the border of Chad and Darfur. And it's like you inch closer, and the front lines are changing, but there's still, that kind of triangular peninsula of Khartoum city. So we're in Khartoum, we're in Durman, Khartoum, and we're at the bridge, and we still can't cross. And then we're at another bridge, and we still can't cross. And so,
How does it feel being so close yet far away?
it was insane.
Yeah.
It was like there was a firewall, just like this invisible wall. And because of the snipers, even if they're further back, you know, they're kind of concentrated, their garrisons are further back, that they had such a good range in terms of their sniper nests that they could get people like kilometers away. It was, I want to say it was paralyzing, but it was so humbling when you realize that if you're not meant to do something, or you're not permitted almost to do something yet, you won't do it. Like, I felt like I was in a video game.
Wow.
Like, and that level hadn't been, you know, I hadn't accessed that level yet. It was crazy.
But it's also a unique position in a way, in the sense of like, this is also your story. I mean, this is directly related to who you are as a person, to Yousra. Not Yousra the reporter, Yousra the person. You're talking about not being able to reach your family home.
Yeah.
And at the same time, still reporting on the war from there.
But you know what it did, Mohammed, is that Yousra the reporter and Yousra the person became one. And that has been a strength. So when I'm speaking to someone,
But what does that mean?
it means that
one.
I'm just a human being
Sure,
doing a job.
sure.
And so when I'm speaking to someone and they've lost everything and they're crying, and I feel that I'm also getting moved and emotional, I'm going to cry as well. And we're going to have that moment together. And I'm not going to put up this boundary because I'm a professional journalist and I'm objective and neutral and you're my contributor. No, we're human beings having a conversation. And I think that's where that merging has been such an amazing lesson, where it's not about me, it's about us. And so I'm not these, you know, compartments, I'm not these characters, I'm just one human being trying to do a certain job. And I'm going to speak to you like I would want to be spoken to, because in a way your story is my story in the context specifically of Sudan very intensely, but that should be the case with any country, because we are a global community. And so it's really helped me in terms of like unifying what my intentions are as a person and as a journalist. And I think that's what then for me makes it vocational and not just a professional job that I get paid to do.
So if we go back to that moment that we were discussing a minute ago about how you found your uncle, you saw your uncle, and then you decided to go to Khartoum from Saudi to get
Yeah.
your parents out.
Yeah.
Because your parents didn't want to leave.
They didn't want to leave. They didn't want to leave.
And they didn't want to leave because of just, is this more of like a stereotypical kind of Arab Muslim background where it's like, no, this is our place, we don't go.
This is my garden. This
Yeah.
is my
Yeah,
house.
yeah,
This
yeah,
is
yeah.
no. It's look. It's a combo, because there's fear, as well, of what's outside. So they're in their home that they love, that they don't want to let go of. Bombs are dropping. Their home is next to the airport, next to the palace, next to all of these key landmarks. Our home, and it's this very difficult balance of how can I ensure their safety, and how can we ensure that they feel, honestly, the jeopardy enough to leave. So it's like trying to convince them to leave because it's so unsafe, but that it's safe for them to leave. It's a catch-22. So what I think ended up almost breaking it, the breakthrough was arriving in Port Sudan, and I'm literally leaving the port and we're all in the car. And I call my mom and I'm like, look, I'm in Port Sudan, and if you guys don't get on a bus, I'm going to come. My mom flipped. Like, you can
Give them
like,
an ultimatum.
the octave went like through the roof. But subhanAllah, what was so insane is that when I was in the consulate in Jeddah, I ran into someone who trained at my dad's newspaper in Khartoum. And he was like, I'm from Port Sudan. When you go, you need to meet Karrar, who is like my in-law, and he's going to take care of you. And so I was setting up the fixer in the consulate while, you know, with someone that I met that knew my dad. So I'm in the car with Karrar, who I've just met for the first time. now is like a lifelong, almost family. And I'm like, Karar, can you organize a bus? And this guy works at the port. He knows all the bus driver. He knows everyone. He's a logistics guy. He's like, yeah, we can get a great bus driver. I was like, okay, so if you can get me a bus to come from Khartoum to Port Sudan, I can not only get my parents, but speaking to my sister Sophia, let's try and get a group of people out at the same time so that there's like safety in numbers and everyone can get out who's in the neighborhood. So once we had the bus through Karar, who I've just met, is sitting next to me, it's like, okay, you guys, you better leave because otherwise I'm going to come through RSF territory and get you. And then it was a no-brainer for my mum because it really is like an extraction is much harder than that courage to just take the leap of faith and leave. And we had to monitor, obviously, every checkpoint, every moment when they left because the checkpoints were super dangerous. People were getting robbed.
And they thought they were going to be gone for a few weeks.
My mum, I mean, she said, should I put the key next to the door? I was like, Mum, take the key. My dad was like, the car key. What do we do about the car? I was like, guys, just leave. Just leave. But also take your important documents. Take everything. Take all your valuables. But they still, I mean...
What was in that moment, Yousra? What was something that maybe you knew because of what you were doing, because of your work, because of the ability for you to kind of gauge the situation that maybe they didn't know at the time and you were maybe not telling them, or something you were withholding?
Honestly, I don't think any of us knew anything. There was such, that fog of war is so, and we know it so well. And even when el-Fasher, we'll come to this, but when el-Fasher was captured, I got it again, which is that the facts are so hard to discern. And so you then have to work extra hard to figure out exactly what's going on and speak to people, and communications are bad. But it was so much worse in those earlier days because it felt so sudden. It had been boiling and there was a simmering and there was an understanding that this is gonna erupt at some point, but it still felt so shocking. And so there was just this shock and this dreamlike surrealism. Like it was like, we're gonna wake up and this is gonna be like it was a bad dream, honestly. And I think it took 2 years for that to go away. And even now it feels like some weird nightmare. And so it's not that I had information that I was guiding what I was doing, is that I just had a very strong sense that we couldn't take any risk to wait it out. And that all signs were pointing towards this being something that we are not prepared for and that we don't understand. And if it does end soon, fine. The army was telling us 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. Now it's close to 3 years. But the lack of trust also in the state and the army and the kind of pathological lying that we've been used to over the years, the self-reliance just was everything. So it's get them out, get them situated, get them to their flat in Cairo, and then we figure it out. But they just need to be extracted from this messy, uncontrollable situation.
And then from that moment onwards, you've been back to, like you were saying, you've been back to Sudan to film different reports.
Yeah, multiple times over 3 years.
And how was that each time going back?
I mean, it's nuts to think to myself that we witnessed the unfolding of the world's largest humanitarian crisis from the very first weeks. So you go to Port Sudan and you see people in tents at the port trying to leave and sleeping in mosques and in embassies and hotels. Like, I mean, we saw the scattering. And then we did Port Sudan, then we went to Durman. And then we left, and very soon after we were in Chad on the border of West Darfur, and we saw like smoke rising and people were fleeing a village right on the border as the militias, the RSF aligned militias were starting to activate. So you were seeing like the activation of it, and then the ripples. So Adre, the border town on West Darfur, when we went, sleepy. I mean, it's always been a bit of a satellite city, like people coming in and out, like a lot of Sudanese people coming into Adre, but it was like 30,000 people, 40,000 people, super tiny. The next time we go, 250,000. Now it's like 500,000.
Wow.
Like it's nuts because the sheer numbers, I mean, the waves of it, it's so disconcerting because every wave is a sign that people have given up hope and they're not going to wait and see what happens because they can't. And one of the things that, you know, is really tough is that people who stayed in Darfur during all of these years of conflict from 2003, I've met families who've been like, we weathered the genocide of 2003, but this is on another level.
That's something I think about as well, and I've thought about it a few times, is that people that have survived the Darfur genocide, like, what are they going through again now? Like, how are they even reliving this?
What was shocking, and I remember this so clearly, is that in Port Sudan and in Khartoum, there was a sense of, like, you could feel the hysteria, the shock, the like everyone's blood was just running like so hot, and no one in Khartoum really thought that this level of armed violence would come to Khartoum. We had the massacre and the revolution, which was a huge wake-up call. But there's still that bubble of privilege and protection in Khartoum, right?
Yeah.
When we were on the border of West Darfur and people were fleeing, there was just this silent resignation. And I was really surprised. I'd see these women on the bank of the river that splits the border, and they're just looking at their village burn, and they're just staring silently. And I'm just like, oh, they've been through this several times before. And they're so like, I mean, there was still strength there and patience, but there was just a real, like a heartbreaking resignation and old grief. Old grief.
Old grief.
It, you know, being in the West Bank, I find it's very similar. It's that kind of deep, entrenched grief where it's like, this is so systematic and so
You see the effect of the occupation time and again.
You see the generational effect. I felt that in Darfur, that it was different to Khartoum. It was very much like there was a fatalism about it.
And I guess there's a real fear right now that the country could still get more divided up. I mean, South Sudan seceded years ago, but there's still fears that it could be more
there's
divisions.
I mean, the RSF and their allies control the southwest and all of Darfur now. I mean, they've pushed to the border. There's still skirmishes on the border, but it's a foregone conclusion, right? They have this parallel government that is not legitimately recognized, but that is now, you know, administratively running their territory in coordination with their partners in other rebel groups. And I mean, at some point, we're going to have to accept that Sudan is effectively split. And that, you know, it's not going to be a big announcement. It's kind of like, now, are we waiting for a World War III announcement, or are we just going to call it? That's what it feels like with Sudan. And it's that game is incredibly dangerous, because what ends up happening is that people are used as human shields. They want to keep people trapped in their territories. The army won't want people to move into RSF territory and vice versa. And then they're the ones who get hit by drone strikes from both sides. So that kind of fracturing, whether we acknowledge it on the map or not, is affecting people's daily lives. It's affecting the flow of aid. It's affecting families who are split between different territories. And you know, there's a feeling from a lot of people in Khartoum and in the north and the east that, you know, the army is a national institution and that's who we count on. And then there are people who don't have that kind of sense of, you know, national statehood, but feel like the army is the lesser evil. But then there are people in rebel-held territories who have only known the army as evil, who are now caught between a rock and a hard place. So that's where it's like, we have this nation that a lot of us really love, and we have this spirit of sharing and community. And that is like being divided along so many fault lines, that kind of spirit of we're all in this together needs to be fortified. And we've seen that, and that's been great. But it's like, there's only so much that people can take.
You had a quote recently that you said you were speaking to a Sudanese artist who told you that, you know, it's like a never ending war. Basically, you live in the RSF held areas and you get bombed by the Sudanese armed forces, and then you go to the areas held by the army, and then you get bombed by the RSF.
Yeah, he said we live two wars.
Two wars, that was it.
And it is two wars. It's probably like, honestly, metastasized into like 4 or 5 wars at this point, because there's the humanitarian front, and then the fact that the aid isn't getting to people. The aid isn't getting to people, and there are no donations for aid. So there's limited aid that's being limited. And then there's the armed violence front, where you've got the shelling on the ground. The drone warfare is nuts. We're looking at, as of last week, 222 drone strikes from the 1st of January. We've been monitoring them. I would not be surprised in the last few days with what's been happening in the Middle East if that's quadrupled, and we don't know.
That's the thing. There's barely any coverage.
I mean, we are constantly competing with the news cycle, and I'm, you know, everyone's conflict matters. I'm not here to feel like Sudan should be constantly platformed when there's so much going on.
But it's been neglected.
It's been neglected because there is a sense that there is an inevitability and that it doesn't affect anyone but Sudanese people, which is
a stereotype in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's like it's a stereotype, but it is a really stupid assumption, because of course the war in Sudan affects everyone's security. Of course it does. It's so sprawling. It's so huge. All the neighboring countries are implicated. Regional powers are implicated. And so it's like, why do you not think that the bad actors that are exploiting this conflict aren't then generating that and directing it towards the other wars that they're fighting in the Middle East and elsewhere? The idea that things can happen in isolation is so ignorant. It's so ignorant, and we should know better than that. And even for me, when I look at the timeline, I'm like, Ukraine, Sudan, Gaza. Why would we not think that the impunity in Ukraine wouldn't drive the impunity in Sudan, wouldn't drive the impunity in Gaza? And the idea now that all of these journalists killed in Gaza by Israel means that me as a journalist, when I go somewhere like Kampala, which is meant to be safe, could be killed by a soldier when they're trying to suppress protests, because he knows that Israel got away with it and they can too. So the idea that this knock-on effect won't hurt us all or impact us all is just ignorant.
Yeah, and adding on top of that, the reason why I said stereotype is because, you know, whether it's the international system or Western media, there's still this perception that, in a way, I don't want to over dramatize it, but there's still this perception that, you know, Sudan or any country in Africa is basically, they're used to wars, they're used to conflict, they're used to civil wars, they're used to just some type of them killing each other.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously quite a colonial thing, right?
Of course,
you know, the uncivilized. But I think that's also been one of the, for me, there's a pet peeve that I have, and you'd be surprised what it is. It isn't, that it's not covered. It's that when it is covered, there's this like, they're ungovernable. You know, I've actually seen that word be used. And this is where the revolution is such necessary context, because not only are we governable, we were taking our future into our own hands. And it was against all odds, like to oust a 30-year dictator,
Omar
al-Bashir, is, I mean, it's happened a lot since, right? We've seen Assad, we've seen like a lot of kind of despots be very rattled, but that was the first Gen Z revolution in the region, and we've seen a lot since. We've seen Nepal, Madagascar, etc. But it's not that I think, we need our flowers for the revolution. It's that we were very conscious. I was very conscious during the revolution that this was a reintroduction for Sudan, that we were showing ourselves, you know, in the world with our chants and the singing and the dancing and the care and the character. This is like, this is who we are. We are not just a military dictatorship, like this barren place. This is what we know as a community. And so when Ala Salah is on a car chanting and that goes viral, I'm like, yeah, there's like, this is us. This is what like we do. We come together. And so that was meant to challenge all of that. And I think it had an effect. Like, I didn't feel like I started from scratch when I was covering the war. I think people were aware of the revolution and there was a lot more interest than there would be. I have an unpopular opinion that I will say
Throw it up.
again and again.
Come on.
Is that compared to other conflicts, Sudan gets coverage. And I will say that,
Really?
yes. And I say that because
Okay.
it took so long for us to get to the DRC. It takes so
Fair.
long for us to cover certain issues. And it's not just because, you know, we don't have the budget or anything. It's just because they're not in the public imagination.
But even, okay,
and Yemen.
And I see where you're coming
and Iraq.
from. Sure, I will agree with you. But what I think what rattles a lot of people in terms of the coverage is that so the DRC, and yet they're getting little to no coverage. So like we're still going lower and lower.
No, we're going lower. And I'm not saying, the bar is low, so this is okay. I'm saying that there is a group of committed people who cover Sudan in different newsrooms that group increased because of the revolution. And there are editors who have increased their interest in Sudan because of the revolution. And that contingent is working very hard. Nisreen Malik at The Guardian, Mohamed Hashem at the BBC, Hiba Morgan at Al Jazeera. Like the list is endless. We have people on Reuters. We have people like, someone said to me, you know, our like post-independence generation didn't do that badly. Like, look, you're a global journalist. We have journalists everywhere. Like the social mobility of going from being independent in 1956 to having like journalists in organizations all over the world who are covering this conflict. That for me is a big deal. And I think we see that in the coverage where there are a lot of Sudanese voices, and then there are a lot of committed Sudan experts. You don't get that for a lot of places anymore. And so what people want, and this is what I'm always told, yeah, but the headlines.
That's what I was going to ask you. I was like, yeah, how do you react to when el-Fasher made global headlines, October, November of last year? And then after that, you know, after that news cycle, Sudan dropped off again.
But do you see that isn't just a random thing? Do you see that el-Fasher making global headlines is the result of all the work that came before it in the months prior? And so those breakthroughs are important to me. So with the revolution, we spent months covering the suppression. And then when that photo went viral, that breakthrough is like, we're prepared. We have all this archive. We've been doing this for months. We're prepared to meet this moment and to have all this coverage. The reason that I'm saying this, I'm not defending the apathy towards Sudan. If anything, that is one of my biggest like battles, is why is there so much kind of selective empathy? Why do we choose one cause over the other, one conflict over the other, when it is a collective cause? My thing is that the expectation that Sudan is going to make headlines every day in this climate it's just naive. You're banging your head against the wall. This is where I say, look at the people who are platformed, who speak on Sudan. Many of them are from Sudan, and many of them have a level of expertise that is globally recognized. All of the journalists in the newsrooms that we mentioned, that is a win. That is a huge win. And I'll take the wins where I can get them. So this is where I feel like the revolution prepared us to cover the war. And just like the fall of Khartoum prepared us to cover the fall of el-Fasher, and the months of the siege prepared us to cover the fall of el-Fasher. And what that does is, say the RSF was eventually and inevitably going to break that siege and capture el-Fasher, they could not do it in a vacuum. They are now being sanctioned by the EU, the UK, the US. We can go into a debate about sanctions and about whether they work. But the commander, Abu Lulu, who carried out those atrocities, who killed people in that trench, is now like a globally wanted war criminal. Hemeti's brother, Abdul Rahim, is a sanctioned man. His younger brother is a sanctioned man.
is it?
And we can definitely talk about that. But my point is that it doesn't happen in silence. And the idea of ending the war, or everyone being up in arms and there being protests in the street, like those kind of outcomes, I think I realized maybe after the first year, I mean, it was tough because the first year you think you can get ahead of it and there won't be any more like violence. But once you realize you can't end the war, then you just start documenting for the sake of documenting. So you have this moment where you realize that you can't end the war and you can't make everyone be up in arms and protest and get their MPs to end the war or their politicians to end the war. And then you just start documenting it for the sake of documenting it so that the people who are going through it have their names and their voices on the record for, international justice potentially, but maybe not even that. Maybe just so that it didn't happen to them and not be recognized, so that it's not as if their experience didn't exist. And so that kind of approach, for me, lends itself to accountability naturally. But you might not get the accountability. But if you do, that's great. So we go into camps that haven't seen anyone, haven't even seen NGO workers or aid workers on the border in North Darfur 8 weeks before el-Fasher is captured. And their feeling of, I mean, it's not even like relief. It's this feeling of like, you see us, you're here to see us. Like they're almost, it's not even honored. And I always try and find this word. It's just this feeling of like gratitude and mixed in with hope,
That you're speaking to them.
That there's someone to listen.
Wow.
And that's really the starting point of impact. It's the person that you're speaking to and how they feel about you speaking to them. And then if it balloons and it expands and it becomes something more powerful, great. But just to have someone be like, you've come to see us and you want to hear me, and they'll be lined up and we're like trying to speak to as many people as we can. And what was crazy is that in that camp, I remember being like, guys, and I say it kind of in the beginning as like getting ahead of it. Look, we're not NGO workers. We don't have any food to offer, but what we can do is hopefully what we say will encourage aid to come here. So like, let's talk. That doesn't dwindle the numbers. Like, because people would come with their UNHCR numbers at some point and I'm like, I don't work for UNHCR. I'm sorry, I can't get you abroad. And I can't like bring in.
That must be tough to hear though, Yousra. People coming with all these different requests.
It's tough. It is tough, but it's this understanding of like, I can't offer this, but I can offer this.
Yeah.
And that might beget that. And like, let's just start here. And so these kind of rituals help to firstly temper expectation, but obviously, you leave and we try and make sure that we don't leave and there isn't something left behind, that we don't give something, to the organizations helping. But it's also like staying in touch with some of the organizers, being aware of their needs to kind of channel resources. Those things are, it's not everyone has to do them, and it's not a sense of like, oh, I remember initially there was one trip I had and I went back and I had such survivor's guilt and I was like, oh, I need to fundraise and I think there was one fundraiser where like I don't remember what happened, but the person then was like, no, like share my video. And then I was like, no, my family members have found out and they're embarrassed, like take down the video. Then I was like, this is too much for me. I can't do this. So then I was like, that's not my lane, right? Like, that's really not my lane. I'm not a fundraiser.
But let me actually ask you about your lane, because this is something I want to hope we can cover before we move on to another thing. Just the battles that you face in media, just from where you are, right, in your profession. Because I'm sure, without even guessing, I'm sure you've had someone, so-and-so sat you down and he's like, Yousra, let me explain Sudan to you. A person who doesn't live in Sudan, a person who's probably not as knowledgeable of Sudan as you. But what I'm trying to get at is, what battles do you feel like you constantly face when it comes to Sudan and the coverage?
It's interesting because I think the hostility it was online a lot initially. And it was kind of not the revolution. The revolution, it was a lot of lauding and like kind of like, but it was that transition after the revolution where everyone got a bit bitter. And it was like clearly this is not working, and it was quite despairing. And so the online rhetoric got very hostile. And so from that period, I'd
Online
say
rhetoric in terms of
just like the way people talk about women or commentators, but it's not even just about women. It's just about the inability to have healthy debate online, or like disagreeing, differing opinions. So there would be attacks launched at me online. And I think at the start of the war, tensions were really high, and there are these camps, they're pro-war camps. And that was what's been really good, is that over time, because of the consistency of like just the facts, or like just what we see, that people then eventually can't say you have an agenda, because how can you have an agenda when you're actually like, you have shifting, like the facts change and things change, and you just share what you see. And so the consistency, I think, has been the antidote to that, where it's like, you can say what you want, but my track record proves that I have no horse in this race, right? Other than civilians, other than the well-being of the civilians in Sudan or in any place we cover. And so, at points I'll be critical of the RSF, and then there are points I'm critical of the army. And that's been really cool, because I think across the board, in the DRC, the Rwandans are coming for me. The Congolese are coming for me because they don't want to admit that Goma has been taken, right? Because that's their jewel in the East. And you're dealing with like bot farms, paid agitators, and then you're dealing with like people who actually buy it, and like that polluted public space is the same, in Uganda. There are people who support the opposition, people who support the ruling party. And so I'm always like kind of like the whipping post. I've now become very kind of happy with that. I'm happy to piss everyone off. No,
Okay.
because if
Okay.
you piss everyone off, then you are doing the right thing. If you have one camp that's constantly propping you up, then you are clearly like not consistent in the truth, because the truth makes everyone upset at some point. And so that's kind of now become a bit of a badge of honor. If I leave Sudan and like the pro RSF and the pro army guys are pissed at me, then I'm like, okay, we did good. It's objective, because there are no angels. There are no angels. I remember early on in the war, I said there are no heroes in this war. There's the military state, and then there's the militia that it created. The civilians are the heroes. That's been the undeniable trajectory. That's been the resounding message of how the civilians in Sudan, the civic society, the emergency response rooms, the people smuggling food into el-Fasher and getting killed.
It was the emergency room responders.
It was emergency response rooms. I mean,
Response
it was
rooms.
the resistance committees, and they had an emergency response room that they were using to bring in that imported food. And you meet these people, and you're like, this level of bravery and courage, like, is just nuts. Like, it's so, like, it's their skin on the line, And the guy showing me videos of guys getting like, held at gunpoint by the RSF. What are you bringing in? Rice. What are you bringing in? Pasta. And then they're getting killed and dumped in a trench. And he's saying, we lost 30 volunteers this week. And they're still like taking calls. Okay. Yeah. All right. When are you guys going? Okay. Send the GPS. Like the heroism is nuts. And they don't even see it as that. They're just like, we're doing what we have to do to keep our people alive. Done. But there also is that question of, where are the airdrops? Where's the international community? Where are the neutral parties that can navigate these warring factions? Why are we as civilians bearing the brunt of this? And so the self-reliance is noble and admirable, but it's also like, they should not have to do this. What's the point of these mechanisms?
What do you say when they ask you these questions?
It's not for me to respond. It's for me to take that question and pose it. I mean, I put that question to WFP, and they said, we haven't, the insurance is so high to fly into el-Fasher because their planes could get shot down, and that they had no pilots that were willing to even take the risk. And at the same time, they were like, it's just so costly. It's operationally impossible for them because the skies are so unsafe because of the drones and the anti-aircraft weapons. And, it's different to Gaza, where Israel controls the skies. So if Israel says, you can do an airdrop, then they can do an airdrop. But this is different. You've got two warring factions battling out in the sky. And so they're saying that. And I'm like, okay, we'll put that in. Does that make any difference to these guys? No. Does it help? No. And the reality is that we went to camps on the border that hadn't seen a single aid delivery, and there were trucks that they could see sitting in the sun waiting for permission to go to other places that had been deemed by these agencies as more in need, which is wild. Hunger is hunger, right? And obviously they're dealing with numbers and severity levels, but you're a hungry family and you're seeing the food sit in the sun. That's where I find the paralysis of these like big organizations like the UN. Why not just pivot this food here until you get the permissions, and another truck will have arrived by the time you get the permissions? That's how I like. And so it's these nimble civic society organizations and like, NRC and the kind of smaller NGOs and MSF who can actually get stuff done. And then the UN just, puts out these statements and these statistics, but on the ground is paralyzed and weaponized by both the military and the RSF. And the camps that we went to in Karnoy and Umbaru, who hadn't seen anything, famine was declared in those places just earlier this year. So there's a lack of nimble action, but there's also a lack of preventative action. And that's been decades in the making because the UN has been active in Sudan for a long time, very long time.
I also want to pivot and ask you about your experience with the RSF, because you've had a short, I think it was like a 2-day captivity or something like that.
Yeah, in 2023.
2023.
Yeah.
What was that like? What was your experience?
Wow, it was deeply, deeply terrifying.
Sure.
And it was the kind of thing where, I'm much better at this now, where I don't suppress my feelings. So if I feel terrified, I'm going to listen to that, and I'm going to navigate based on the fear, but it doesn't have to kind of govern me, but I can also just accept that I'm very scared. I don't see any, problem in that. At that time, I was so overwhelmed by the feeling of vulnerability that I suppressed it, and I was negotiating our release. First, I was negotiating access to a Jinena.
So you were trying to get somewhere?
We were trying to cross in.
Okay.
And we were told that we would be able to negotiate with them when we got there to try and get in. We weren't. We were handed over.
Oh, wow.
And, on the border.
Handed over by
the brother of the person that was taking us in.
For some sort of reward? Or?
No, just handed over. Like, maybe it is a reward system because he now looks like a big man that he's brought in all these foreigners, but he handed us over. He didn't even acknowledge that we needed to speak to him first and try and figure out a game plan. They surrounded us, and when I spoke to them, and then they suddenly took our passports, and then they saw that there were foreigners, they changed their tune in a way that was like so diabolical. It almost went just from like black to white, but it was still, we were being held, but they didn't want us to feel like we were being held. So everything was in double speak. They had our passports, but we had our phones, and we weren't allowed to leave the room. And they were negotiating with me, but they were also just beleaguering me. So every time I was trying to sleep or rest, they would come and talk to me about something. But the point is that they basically said, how can we trust you to tell our story the way we want it to be told? Which I would never. No, we can't tell the story. We can't do a propaganda tour. And honestly, nothing is going to make you guys look any better after what you've done. So what we can do, though, is just go with you, and you can have a say, you can put out your statement, and I'll have my questions, and we can look around. As they were doing that, they were going through my file and being like, you did a story about the massacre, and you said it was the RSF. You did this. So they're pulling out their intelligence.
Jeez.
And I'm like, yeah, I did. And those were the facts. And right now so it was increasingly.
Is this when you started feeling that something is up?
There was a very clear moment where it was like, we're no longer welcome here.
Yeah.
And this kind of negotiation window is now an extraction window. Thankfully, we had a backstop. There was an official that we'd worked with in the prior trip who would receive us on the case of deportation. And that was, at that point, it was like, we need to get our passports and we need to, so how do I tell them that we need our passports? And, you know, it was just clearly like, if you don't give these foreigners back their passports, embassies are going to get involved. You know, you can treat me like, you know, bit the Sudan that you can kind of push around and talk to like, you know, your cousin. But fine, let's lean into that and let's kind of position the vulnerable, you know, white foreigners that are going to cause a diplomatic incident. So we kind of all worked on it together. I mean, our security advisor on that trip, Martin Valls, is like a veteran. So he was like, okay, so I'd go back, I'd negotiate, and then we'd discuss our strategy. At some point, they got severely ill from a stew that these guys brought that I didn't touch. I was just like, I'm good. And now they're all like, is this good? Can we eat this? And I'm like, yeah, you can. So they all got sick. So then we kind of leaned into that as like, they're really sick now. Time's running out. That was the moment that they started to panic. And then I said, look, just send us back to Chad. We're happy to go back. They wanted to film a video of me. They asked me to speak on video and say that I had come in, and we were like, is this a hostage video?
Yeah, I was going to ask.
I mean, it is a hostage video.
Like
and this is when Martin was like, we are now hostages. You know, we need to accept that. But what we negotiated was like, I will sign a document and say that I have come here, you know, my own volition to come and try and cover. Like, you didn't capture me in Chad. And that we're happy to just accept that we'll be sent back. And so that was the middle ground. But they had no kind of admin knowledge. It was interesting speaking to them over that time. It was like a research trip for me, because it was such a pseudo state. You know, they had all this stuff, and they're like, you know, someone had a clash in the market, and they had like a mini tribunal, but then they sent off the Masalit kid because they're like, we don't want you guys to think that we target Masalit. And it's like, you've just told me that. So clearly there's...
Did it give you some sort of window into how these guys think?
Absolutely. I mean, I asked one of the guys, because he was gloating about, you know, Umar al-Bashir. I actually love Umar al-Bashir more than Hamidti. Umar al-Bashir came to us and sat in our yard and
he created the Janjaweed.
He created the Janjaweed based on an Arab nationhood that he still excluded them from. And that's why this war has so much bitterness, because they feel like they are entitled, but the Riverine Arabs have more than them. But I said to him, did Umar al-Bashir arm you because you're Arabs? And he goes, yes, of course Umar al-Bashir armed us because we're Arabs. And then I was like, okay. And then he tried to backtrack. But that's clearly been the mission. That was clearly Umar al-Bashir's strategy. So we gained a lot of intel, but what I think fundamentally I learned from that is that we can't deal with them. We've tried. I've tried to understand if we can do an embed with them. We can try and figure it out. It's not possible. They are not. You can't negotiate with them. You can't talk to them on a level. When I go sit down with the military about an embed, I'm like, you know, they'll always try, commanders, like, what's your line? خطك شنو? And I'm like, my line is the civilians. And if you care about civilians, we have mutual interest. And that usually gets them, because they're like, well, yeah, my family and friends and everyone's impacted by the war. And so if this girl is going to go in, and this little girl or whatever they think of me is going to go in and show the civilian, you know, harm, then that does actually affect me, because that's my home and that's my people as well. So there's always this mutual interest that you can kind of at some point reach. Like, I don't care what agenda you have, but I want to get the voices of people out in your territory. And so I've tried that with the RSF, and they just haven't budged. They see me as an enemy combatant or something. And if that's the cost of covering all their atrocities and all they've done, then so be it. They get to miss out on any semblance of legitimacy or credibility, because the fact that they are constantly hiding what they're doing is a sign that their crimes are ongoing. And what hurts me is that the civilians in their territories will never have a voice that way, because they'll constantly be using them as human shields rather than constituents, while building a fake government. And so the pseudo state that we saw in that village on the border is the pseudo state that they're building. It's meaningless, and it's built on terror and fear.
Let me actually ask you about that, Yousra, because as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking what one may ask, and it's, we know that both sides are backed by foreign actors, right? Foreign parties. But what benefit does a country like the UAE, for example, get from backing the RSF?
Resources. The UAE's gold hunt has been so aggressive, and it's not just in Sudan. You know, it's in the DRC, it's in the Central African Republic. Their idea of the RSF is basically like having, you know, security contractors securing your investments. And they've made it clear. They have said, there was a minister who said on record, we have billion-dollar investments in Sudan that we need to protect. And one thing that everyone kind of always forgets, but should be more relevant now than ever, is the Red Sea. The Red Sea is what the UAE wants. And
that's why they're butting heads with Saudi.
That's why they're butting heads with Saudi, because the Red Sea is a red line for Saudi.
Yep.
And I remember when I was in Port Sudan and I interviewed a lady in February 2024. And she said to me, when the RSF came into her home, they said, you go to Port Sudan, we'll come to you guys in Port Sudan. We're going to reach the Red Sea. And I remember that was the moment where I was like, oh, because everything kind of started to light up. It was quite early, but it wasn't so early that we didn't know that the UAE was fully invested, but it was still unclear like what the scale of their desires were. And so when she said that, I remember just starting to be like, okay, yeah, the Red Sea is a big factor in this. And then everything else since has backed that up. But I mean, we see that they, even in Puntland, you know, in Somaliland, Hargeisa, the Ethiopia, what they're doing with Ethiopia to try and get access to the port through Eritrea, through a war. And of course, you know, the Houthis, you know, the fight in Yemen against the Houthis. So this is completely in line with what they're doing. But the Red Sea, the arable land, the gold, the uranium, the oil still in the southwest.
Resource.
It's resources and it's control.
So remember how we were talking earlier about those who were indicted and the fact that Hamiti wasn't. Is that in relation to his relationship with the UAE, the fact that he's backed by the UAE?
I've asked this in off-record chats, and one of the things that comes up is that they say there's an evidence threshold, and the idea that there's an evidence threshold with Hamiti would make sense a bit more now because he's kind of been off the playing field a bit in terms of battlegrounds. Abdurrahim was on the ground in el-Fasher, filmed. Hamiti's been kind of laying low. There are reports that he had an injury, like a very severe injury early on in the war. So he's emerging now. We just saw him in Kampala with President Museveni in Uganda. He's now starting to do his kind of like African despots tour that he did in January 2024. But there's that kind of realpolitik thing of he might be the Haftar of Sudan. He might be the guy that runs half of Sudan, and we need to keep an open line of communication with him. And they've kind of said that to me in very like, not, you know, in clear terms. We want to keep an open line of communication. They don't want to completely ostracize him. They might justify that to the public and say, oh, it's for security reasons, because if you alienate him, then he'll go like full all out on what, because he has no fallback with the West. But he already is going all out. And one of the things that I've heard from policymakers in Europe, a line that actually really stuck with me was, well, maybe it's better that the RSF is dealing with the UAE and not our enemies. And I went ballistic because the logic of that is so nonsensical. Because even just from Europe's security perspective, the UAE's backing of the RSF has driven the Sudanese state to give to close a Red Sea base deal with Russia for fighter jets. It's pushed Sudan deeper into their relationship with Iran, with China. Why would you not try and mute this war so that you can circumvent the kind of the handouts that are going to be given to the people that you see as enemies? So, I mean, this is where I'm like, it's not that it's willful ignorance, It's not that I think, oh, these people are stupid, they don't get Sudan. Is that there is a, like, they want to be blind. They're willfully blind because they're not going to confront the UAE. They're not going to say, oh, thanks for the investment in Frankfurt, but can you just chill on Sudan?
Yeah.
It's not going to
no European country is going to.
No. And someone asked me, someone literally asked me yesterday, do you think that if the UAE was, if the UAE was supporting Hemeti, it wasn't supporting Hemeti, could he have carried out this war? Hemeti was already amassing a lot of wealth, right? He was building an empire. He's incredibly rich from what he's already done with Wagner, with the gold mines, and his stuff with the EU and the border force. Like he's been building legitimacy and wealth for a long time. What the UAE gave him wasn't the means, but the cover. The UAE gave Hemeti global impunity because the West was never going to call out the RSF at the level that was needed and put a stop to the war with the UAE's involvement. And we've seen the UAE involved in every peace talk, all the humanitarian conferences that happen in the West, the UAE is involved. That makes Sudanese people here protest. They go and protest because they're like, how can you have one of the main supporters, though they deny it, the caveat that we will have to put in, the UAE denies this claim, but all evidence supports that they're, militarily leading the RSF to victory on several fronts. But the idea that the UAE is constantly positioning itself as like, the penholder on Sudan, and that they get to decide the fate of Sudan, is exactly what Hemeti wanted. And so he really, I just honestly, sometimes I'm like, the man is smart. Like, he's managed to cover all his bases. And so for this level of violence and this level of, loss, casualty, and financial loss to be overlooked and seen as like an inconvenient war by Western, mediators and politicians is absolutely appalling, but engineered successfully. Nuts. It's just nuts.
I want to bring it back to you and your reporting. One question I wanted to ask you is if there's, I'm sure you have several, but if there's any particular story from Sudan that stays with you, that you just keep replaying in your head. There are moments. There are quite a few moments because there's like things will come up like with, when they're relevant. But the one story, and this came up for me last night, and I said this to my editor, the story of the last year in the tape that we presented to the RSF, not the RSF, the RTS. We spend the whole time speaking about the RSF now. I'm like, they're everywhere. The tape we presented to the Royal Television Society, the piece about the food smugglers, that one is like, wow, I can't get over that. And the reason I can't get over that is because, I had the idea to interview like emergency responders, especially around food because of the famine. But then increasingly was like, wait, these guys are smuggling in food and are starting to see things online before we go. And I'm really lucky that I have such an incredible team, with me and here in London that kind of give me kind of editorial freedom to just pitch what I want and do what I want. And so I'm writing this pitch and it's like, okay, so we need to speak to these volunteers and we need to understand how they're doing it and maybe even like in bed with them if it's safe. Obviously it wasn't safe. So we arrive, we still don't know if we're going to speak to them. And the guys who are with us are very much like steeped in that kind of mutual aid work. So they say, look, it's really unsafe for them. There are informants everywhere. We're in North Darfur at this point, and it's super porous. And they sit down, they say, okay, they can meet, but no one can see that they're meeting with you, and they have to come in through a different entrance. And this is before we even film. This is just to talk and see if they would be comfortable. And they go into the yard of the house, and then later on we come in. And I sit there and I'm like, they're very quiet. They're just so hyper alert, observant, like just trying to study us and see like we could be ops, like they don't know that. So they're just like trying to read. And I go in like, we really need to do this. What you're doing is so incredible. We just want to show the measures that everyone is taking to get this food in.
and this is so sensitive, and we'll take care of you. And it's like, we have a really good track record. Like, no one that I've ever interviewed has been arrested, alhamdulillah. Like, the people that have been anonymous have been stayed protected. Like, we will take care of you if you're willing to share. And there was just this moment of silence. And then when he spoke, and it was so heartfelt, he was like, the fact that you guys are here to speak to us means so much.
Wow.
And we will try our best to show you what we're doing. And we thought we would have to, it would be a conversation and a back and forth. And it was just like, no, we're gonna make this work. And so we just start coordinating when to see them and when safe. And we get in the car with them the day that we're filming, and we're extracting at that point, because it's so dangerous that, like, if you stay in one place for too long, and informants start to, like, a drone strike could hit just because we're there. And we go to their storeroom, and on the way, he's finding out about people who've been killed. They're coordinating, and then he's telling me, like, 30 people. I'm like, how many this week? He says 30. I was shocked. In a week. And so we get to the storeroom, and we don't even have to do any sort of, like, visual sequencing. Let's go this place. Just what they're saying is so, like, unfathomably vivid, right, that we are just, it's almost like you're just being held, like, it's so suspenseful all the way until we go to the storeroom. And we're understanding the logistics and the fact that they bury the food outside of el-Fasher and then send GPS like pins to the people inside to risk the, like, kind of the outer edges of the siege to go get that food and then take it in. And that's how people had been surviving for months.
18 months it was under siege.
Yeah. I mean, there was, like, a bit of, like, the trickle of aid towards those last 4 months. Like, it was just halas, like, it was complete drought in terms of any sort of sustenance. And I think what just sticks is the idea of, we have no choice. Like, this is our duty. And that feeling comes up a lot for me. And
a feeling of duty.
A feeling of, like, there's no choice. Like, there is a choice, you're making a choice, and externally it looks like, you know, wow, what a great choice you've made to go and cover Sudan this many times. But you don't feel like it's a choice, because the other option is just inconceivable and not possible, not viable, in terms of, like, you just letting that happen. And I think when I look back on guys like them and the amazing women that we met in the camp, you know, this doctor who said to me very clearly, I am psychologically traumatized by the number of stories that I've heard. And, you know, you think of them, and it's just like, towards the end of the year, when I start to despair a bit, right? Like, another year is ending and this hasn't ended. And I really, like, have to be diverted back to that, because I'm like, if, like, there is so much, like, I don't even say beauty, but it's like there's so much valor, you know, that's really the only word that I can use. And the glory of what they're doing is so nuts. And it's like, yeah, they might not be, you know, immediately satisfied by this outcome of what's gone on in el-Fasher. Obviously, it's devastating. Obviously, it feels like futile. And I get that, because I get that too. I get that feeling every now and then. But the idea that their courage is, like, celebrated, and that we know what they've done and they know what they've done, it's just, those are the things that stay with me. And they're also the horrible things that stay with me as well. But I think it gets offset, because the light is always brighter, you know, than the dark. Like, it always just kind of fills the room more than, yeah, the RSF are horrendous, and the army's blocking food to places. It's these people that are just so incredibly brave. And there's a difference between bravery and courage. And I think I've realized, like, covering these stories, you kind of get to the really granular differences in, like, human experience and emotion. And so bravery is that, like, is that moment where you are facing, right? You're facing the RSF, you're on the donkey cart going out. But courage is in the planning. is in the everyday moment to moment, I'm going to keep doing this. I'm doing this. It's that consistent courage and then the bravery of, you know, facing it with your bare skin. And so those stories just help me understand us, you know, they help me understand people. And they'll come up in different moments. And when I'm like trying to discern certain things, I'll remember these experiences and I'll carry them with me forever.
Another thing that's really memorable, and since we were talking earlier in the conversation about Yousra, the inability to separate Yousra the reporter from Yousra the person, yeah, we saw that on full display when you went back to your house, your family home last year. So we started a conversation about your parents leaving. Now we're at a point where, you know, 2 years later, you actually get the chance to go back to your family home in Khartoum and to see it for the first time in 2 years or more after it was ransacked.
Yeah.
Been waiting for this for 2 years. And it's not a celebration. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming. So this is where the family would sit. We'd wake up every morning and we'd come out and have some tea here.
And that was a very striking thing to watch. I mean, that was not easy as a viewer. It was heavy.
Yeah. You know, I remember I was in Cairo for a friend's wedding, and it was like the trip was coming up and it was like 2 weeks and I was getting so anxious, and I had to actually be like, oh, I'm not anxious about the fact I can't find my shoes. I'm anxious about what I'm about to do in a bit. Like, let me be honest. And I think, you know, you feel naked. Like, there's no way to explain it. Like we'd say in Sudan, like silik arian, you know, a raw wire. And I remember, my mentor, Rahini Rabi, the person who has gotten me through everything. And she said, you need to be really clear on why you're doing this, because there was no doubt that I had to share, but I had to be really intentional about it because it had to have purpose. It can't just be, oh yeah, I'm going to open my house to the world and have a pity party, or, oh, like this is about me and my house, when it's
but
like,
it made it so much more powerful.
Yeah, but the only reason that it was powerful is because we went in as a team understanding the assignment, right? It's not just, oh, I'm going to go and like make this whole, the world's largest displacement crisis is not about me and my house, you know?
Fair. Yeah.
So, but knowing that it was a tool, knowing that I'm sharing for a reason, knowing that, you know, this is everyone's home. You know, I have my friends who'd lost their houses where, like, honestly, the catharsis of, you know, seeing your house, and it's like they're crying for my house that they spent their time in, and we all had these like amazing gatherings, and they're crying for their house, but also like people that I don't know feeling like they finally let go of that grief. I can't explain to you that I would have a dream about my house at least 3 times a week for 2 years
Before going back.
before going. You know, one dream there are people and you can't go in. One dream you go in and, you know, it's fine, and like it's a fixation because it's so visceral. Like the connection to your home is so deep that you're visualizing it a lot of the time. And subhanallah, like maybe the last couple of dreams, the last batch, because they're in batches, the last batch of dreams, I remember there was one where I went into the house and there were people there and they're like, you can't go upstairs. And I was like, what? Okay. And then when we got there, there was actually, my dad's cupboard was blocking the staircase. And so we were like, okay, the security advisor had to go up there and check that there wasn't any unexploded ordnance. So the connection was there. The umbilical cord was always there with the house. But it was like everyone was going through this because it was inaccessible. You know, like Khartoum, 7 million people. And Durman is, you know, the northern part, northwest there's army held territory, but that started to clear. So it was like this very slow clearing. But then that kind of part of Khartoum, like kind of on the Nile, especially those parts in the center, the cluster in the center, they're impenetrable. So no one had a clue. You don't have any basis. So as these videos start coming out, people are starting to like send people to see their homes. And it's one thing to see it and accept and see it abroad, but that kind of walk through experience was so healing for me and so cathartic, because you kind of then finally face the reality and accept the reality. And one of the amazing things from the piece is that I felt like it gave some people that opportunity to feel that through the piece. At the same time, you know, people who dealt with losing their homes in so many different circumstances, whether it's in Ukraine or in Gaza or, you know, from like natural disasters. We just covered the floods in Mozambique and people lost their homes there. And I felt like I understood them, you know, way better than I would have. So it was very intentional. And, you know, it's weird having, you know, that many people see you cry.
Yeah.
It's super.
And go through your room and look for your favorite painting and just... Yeah. There was so much packed into it.
Yeah. And I didn't know that I'd be able to call anyone because the signals had been an issue. So it was only,
your mom.
So yeah, it was only once we got there. And I remember like going outside on the steps being like, Mama, I'm at our house. And she was like, in Joburg?
Also, she didn't know you were in Sudan. This is the thing. You didn't tell her that you were in Sudan.
Yeah, I always kind of keep it secret. I keep it secret because my mom won't
Brave.
sleep. She won't sleep. She won't sleep. So it's like, you just have to tell her once. So as soon as I know that something's airing, Mama, by the way, I'm in Sudan. I'm leaving on this day. But she was shocked. And I said, I gave her a heads up. I was like, do you want to do this? And she was like, yeah. And Garwin, our cameraman at the time, had stayed in the house before the war because we were trying to go to el-Fasher in September 2022. And so he knew the house intimately, and he'd spent time with my mom and my dad in the house. And so I, you know, it being Garwin, she was like, yeah, okay. And we just first, before we even went upstairs, just went through all the inventory because she was checking what was there and what wasn't there. And a number of times I had to say, no, they took it. No, they took it. And then we went upstairs, and then that was when she really felt like she just kind of...
I never thought that I'll see my house like that. Yani, this is my house for the end of my life. I was supposed to die here in this house. I was supposed to be buried here in my country.
I mean, she was saying a lot of heavy stuff.
Yeah, that was just even honestly a clip.
Yeah,
that was a clip. Yeah. My dad didn't do it like that. My dad didn't really want to engage. And then he just asked me this one question like 2 days after. It was just like, did they take my suits? And I was just like, yeah, Dad, they took the suits.
But why the suits? Why was that the first question?
Every suit is a memory. Yeah. Every suit. I mean, he's a journalist.
Exactly.
He's a politician, and he'd pick his suits for the different like battles that he had to face on the day.
Yeah.
And the gifts, I mean, we'd always buy him ties. So he had a tie from everyone he loved. And it's really weird because it's not a material. It's not about the materiality of it, right?
It's the weight.
It's the value of like the experiences you've had with these things and what they mean to you and who gave them to you and where you got them. And so the photos really helped because I've seen people's family photos like scattered in random places, like under bridges. I saw a wedding dress under a bridge, which was like, this is someone's wedding dress. And so to find those photos was huge. To find the painting and like some books and stuff. But I think it just all was like, okay, it's really not, if it's about the experiences, then it's about the people, right? That you're having these experiences with. And so it just very much honed in on what matters. And I definitely felt like we can get through this at the end of that. Like, you know, you can jet clean a house, you can jet clean a country, but not in the physical sense, not in the sense of the streets are going to be cleaned and the buildings are going to come back and the institutions are magically going to become even more, you know, efficient when they were never efficient in the first place. But just about like, we can like spiritually, like heart and soul, get through this with everything intact, in spite of everything that we've lost and all the people that we've lost. There has to be something of Sudan that remains. And I think there will be.
Well, I guess that leads into my final question is that what keeps you going amid all of this?
It's a couple of things. I think one is that, like, who am I to decide what should happen? who am I to decide that there is like a deadline or an outcome that needs to happen? And so I'm just going to keep pushing and doing what I can do in the realm of my influence and what I can actually make happen. And then the second thing is the extreme privilege of being able to do this, of being able to go back, of being able to share, of having some sort of hand in how this is told. Like, what the hell? Of course I'm going to do it. Of course I'm going to keep going. And I think, you know, it's interesting because it's not even about like, oh, I have to because I have the privilege. It's I'm happy to because I have the privilege. And I remember, like, it was interesting. When I was in Jerusalem doing the Christmas shift just now in December, I went into the Ethiopian church next to the Holy Sepulchre. And there was a line from the gospel about like, God loves a cheerful giver. And I was like, yes, just gladfully, like we need to just do things like with ikhlas, with sincerity, and like understanding that this is like we get to live and do and enact in the world. And so this is where this is all quite existential for me, but in a good way, ultimately, because the person I was before the war is completely different. The person I was before the revolution. And it's not that, oh, I've changed because, you know, the pendulum has swung, is that this has been a part of my evolution as a person.
Right. This is your journey.
This is my journey. And yeah, it's some hard yards in there, but like I'm not doing it alone, and I'm grateful to do it.
Look, there is a reason why I wanted this conversation to happen for months. And I'm so glad we finally found the time. Yousra, thank you so much for coming, and thank you for, and especially during Ramadan, you're fasting as well,
yeah,
and all these questions. And
no, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming through. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. The questions were really good. Thank you.
Thanks,
Great.
Yousra.